Few understand the weight a brave child carries when pain greets them first in life. Simone, an 8-year-old orphan boy, already knew absence like an old companion. Raised by his loving grandmother Donna Edgeridge's in a tiny, worn-down house, they didn't have much except love. Despite the crushing child poverty, his grandmother and grandson bond was like an invisible blanket, warming their spirits on the coldest days. Donna Edgeridge's had already suffered too much, losing her daughter early and her son-in-law disappearing without a trace. Yet, she never let grief turn her heart to stone. With simple gestures, she taught Simone life's real values: faith and hope, rewarded kindness, and the strength of a noble heart. It's not about having much, it's about giving much. A shared soup, a goodnight prayer, a warm hug. These were the gifts that shaped the soul. But age and hunger began to leave their mark. Her health declined, her body weakened. Still, her faith never wavered. And though Simone never said it aloud, he sensed what was coming. You see, it's in these quiet, breaking moments that the most inspiring true stories begin, when pain prepares the ground for the miraculous. In the same village lived Don Julian, an elderly man whose own children had abandoned him. Despite his solitude, he remained generous, always reaching out with a kind word or a piece of bread. His heart carried the scars of loneliness, but instead of bitterness, he chose compassion. Rare is the soul that offers love with nothing to gain. Yet Don Julian lived that way daily. Meanwhile, Simone faced an impossible decision: to sell his wooden rocking horse, his most treasured possession. To others, just a toy. To him, it was a symbol of memory, of his mother's touch, of childhood before grief. Yet he was ready to give it up in a profound sacrifice for love, to buy food for his grandmother. In that choice, we see the purest kind of courage. How often do we cling to things we should let go of, even when someone we love needs us to release them? True love sometimes means surrender. It means placing someone else's need above our comfort. Like Simone, you too might discover that surrendering something precious opens a door to something divine, to God's miracle, disguised as an ordinary day. Simone arrived at the market with a tight chest and determined eyes. The Caballito de Madeira in his hands held all that remained of his childhood. An elderly man, kind-eyed, approached him. Upon hearing Simone's story, he was deeply moved and gave him more coins than the toy was worth. It was a sacred moment, the kind that ties strangers together forever. Clutching the coins, Simone ran back home as if holding the most precious treasure in the world. He bought bread, milk, and returned with a glowing heart. His grandmother was still alive, fragile, but smiling. They sat together and shared a humble meal that tasted like hope. A simple moment, yes, but it carried the unmistakable touch of God's miracle. Life, in its quietest scenes, often hides its greatest gifts. A shared piece of bread, a sip of milk, a quiet smile. These things outshine gold. So next time you give something, whether time, words, or food, do it with intention. Because sometimes the smallest act becomes a first step toward a hopeful ending. As they shared the meal, Donna Edgeridge's began to speak with gentle wisdom. She talked about life, about trusting that God never abandons, about Simone's future. Her words, slow and tender, planted seeds in the boy's heart. She spoke not in fear, but in love, preparing him gently for a time when she might no longer be by his side. She reminded him that the world is often hard, but never hopeless, that faith and hope are not luxury items. They are survival tools. And most importantly, she said, God sends the right people at the right time. Her advice wasn't poetic. It was practical. She gave him truth, the kind that anchors you when storms hit, the kind only a noble heart could pass on. That night, though they didn't know it, was their last together. They laughed, they prayed, they ate in gratitude. Sometimes, the most sacred moments come wrapped in silence, not trumpets. But when they pass, they echo forever, whispering toward the next chapter. The next morning, Simone woke with the memory of his grandmother's words still fresh in his heart. But when he went to wake her, she no longer stirred. Her face was calm, her spirit gone. Panic struck. He ran barefoot through the village to the church, tears pouring down his face. Pastor Ezekiel met him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and followed him home. Once inside, the pastor confirmed the truth Simone feared. Donna Edgeridge's had passed. There were no more words, only sobs. The boy curled next to her, his small body heavy with grief. He had lost everything now. She had been his anchor, his shelter, his entire world. What does a child do when the only love they've ever known disappears? And maybe you've been there in a moment of devastating loss, wondering how you'll keep breathing. It's in those moments that remembering God never abandons becomes not just belief, but a lifeline. And sometimes it's exactly when you're most lost that a new chapter quietly begins. The funeral was humble. Neighbors came, offering kind words and a few shared tears. But when it came to taking in Simone, no one stepped forward. Pity is easy. Responsibility, not so much. Pastor Ezekiel stood in silence, heart heavy, asking himself, what will become of this orphan boy? Then, without fanfare, Don Julian stepped forward. His eyes, full of loneliness once, now held purpose. He didn't speak much, but he didn't have to. His offer to adopt Simone came from a place of deep empathy. He knew what it meant to be alone. And in extending his hand, he offered more than a home. He offered a second chance, a gift of love. It's often through ordinary people that God's miracles come to life. Maybe you've had a Don Julian in your life. Or maybe you're being called to be one. Don't miss the divine disguise as everyday kindness. Because when you act from love, heaven notices. Still deep in grief, Simone heard his grandmother's voice in memory. God always sends the right people at the right time. He clung to that truth. Accepting Don Julian's invitation wasn't easy, but he trusted that this was part of the plan. Before leaving his home, he took his grandmother's scarf, a piece of her to carry with him, wrapped around his neck. It was more than fabric. It was faith. Arriving at Don Julian's home, Simone took in the warmth of the space. Modest, yes, but filled with quiet dignity. It didn't smell like sadness. It smelled like safety, like new beginnings. For the first time since his loss, he felt something new, the delicate flicker of hope. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Sometimes, all we need is one person believe in us, to change our course completely. For Simone, Don Julian became that person. And soon, they would begin building more than just toys. Don Julian led Simone into his woodshop, a quiet haven filled with the scent of fresh shavings, worn tools, and the soft hum of purpose. It was a sacred space, and now it was Simone's too. Don Julian explained how each toy he carved wasn't just play. It was healing, storytelling, a legacy in wood. Together, they chose their first project, a brand new Caballito de Madera. The choice was intentional. That horse was more than a toy. It was a symbol of Simone's past, and now, a symbol of restoration. As they carved side by side, laughter started to slip between the silence. The boy's wounds were still there, but now, so was joy. And for Don Julian, sharing his craft wasn't just teaching, it was redemption. This is the power of creating. When you use your hands and heart to build something, be it art, food, or even relationships, you begin to rebuild yourself. Creation becomes therapy. That's how we turn pain into beauty. And just like that, Simone and Don Julian began carving not only wood, but a whole new life. Time passed, and Simone blossomed. With every lesson in carpentry came lessons in faith, kindness, and resilience. He learned that building something well takes patience, that generosity is a decision, and that faith and hope are the compass through chaos. Don Julian didn't just raise a boy, he shaped a man. Simone never forgot the wisdom passed down from his grandmother or his mentor. He became the kind of person who leads not by what he says, but by how he lives. Through sweat and stillness, through loss and love, he was molded into someone whose life taught others. And that's the essence of a noble heart, to live in a way that your story blesses others. These values became his foundation. They weren't built overnight, but step by step, day by day, Simone walked in the light of those who loved him, and soon it would be his turn to pass it on. Now a grown man, Simone noticed a young boy in the village, thin, alone, with that same lost look he once wore. Without hesitation, he returned to the workshop and began carving again. though it took shape slowly, lovingly. When finished, he placed a horse in the child's arms. A gift, a symbol, a full circle, a quiet act of sacrifice for love. In that moment, Simone understood every kindness, every tear, every act of faith had brought him here. He realized that God always rewards those who act with love, even when no one is watching. That the legacy of his grandmother and Don Julian lived on in his hands, his choices, his heart. Because sometimes the greatest stories don't end in pain. They end in purpose. And this is more than just a touching tale. It's a true, inspiring story about life after loss, about a lost family that became a chosen one, and about how one act of love can change everything. So now I ask you, how many times have you felt like Simone? Alone, confused, wondering if your story had already ended in loss? Maybe you're grieving a person, a dream, or a part of yourself. But this story teaches us something powerful. Pain may shape your story, but it doesn't have to write the final chapter. Are you ready to let God rewrite your ending? Don't wait for a dramatic miracle. Sometimes the miracle is hidden in small choices. A kind word, a step forward, a hand extended to someone who's lost. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to show up. Or maybe you're the one meant to show up. Because those with noble heart, who live with faith and hope, always see their kindness rewarded. Not always quickly, but always fully. If this story moved you, if something inside you shifted, then don't just leave quietly. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell truths that change lives. And who knows, maybe next time, your story is the one we'll be telling.